Hi, have you heard of this conflict? Probably not. Welcome to the least violent war in history. This is Hans Island, a completely useless 1.3 square kilometer limestone rock in the Kane Basin, located between Greenland and Nunavut, Canada. Yep, it's just a rock. Despite its uselessness, this rock actually has a reasonably extensive history, including a border dispute that lasted over a century. During this war, no one used these, or even these, but instead these. It was regarded as the most peaceful war in history, the casualties being approximately 3 bottles of Canadian whiskey, 4 bottles of Danish schnapps, and a couple flags. Other than this, the war had no repercussions to basically anyone involved. The conflict began in the 1800s with Canada's purchase of the Hudson Bay Company land. This allocated a large amount of Arctic land to Canada. Canada believed that this included Hans Island, even though it, clearly didn't. During the later Arctic exploration in the 1870s, the island was first documented. Because of how much he helped in the expedition, the explorers decided to name the island Hans Island after the native who helped the expedition, Hans Hendrik. However, the possession of the land was still unknown, as it lay right in the center of the channel. After hearing of the island, both Canada and Denmark claimed the island as their own, unintentionally starting a conflict that would last over a century. In the 1970s, explorers began geographically mapping the Arctic. With technology more accurate than paper, they discovered the island lay nearly exactly in the center of the strait, determining its exact coordinates. With this new information, the topic of sovereignty was brought up again, still with neither country coming to an agreement, reigniting the conflict after over 100 years of stalemate. Subsequently, in 1984, after still no agreement, the Danish Minister of Greenland led a visit to the island, planting a flag and a note that read, "Velkommen til den danske ø," or in English, "Welcome to the Danish island." I definitely butchered that. He also noted that he left a bottle of Danish schnapps. After learning this, Canada took it personally and reciprocated with a visit of their own, planting a Canadian flag, note, and bottle of Canadian whiskey. For nearly 40 years, until 2018, infrequent visits were made by both countries as a feeble joke of war, exchanging more flags and whiskey. However, in 2018, a joint task force was made between the two countries that would eventually come to the agreement on island sovereignty. The Danish part of the task force argued that the island was an important staging ground for native populations in Greenland, especially during hunting season for polar bears. Canada argued that it was important for their Inuit populations, similar to the rest of Nunavut. They also argued that they had purchased the land in the late 1800s with the Hudson Bay Purchase. After 5 more years of standstill, the countries eventually agreed it was not important enough to argue further, and decided to split the island. The split went down a natural crack in the island, dividing it around 40% for Canada and 60% for Greenland, ending the nearly 150-year dispute. Wow, that was pretty pointless, says you. And fair enough, it's a pretty worthless conflict to solicit an entire video. However, there are real-life implications from it. For one, it's a big step for indigenous populations. Not that the outcome benefited them much, but one of the agreements was unfettered access to the island for natives, which is a big step for native sovereignty as they are independent from borders. Also, the agreement was intentionally settled right when the Russia-Ukraine war began, proving that border disputes can be settled without bloodshed. In conclusion, this was a pretty useless war. However, it stands out from many modern-day conflicts because of the lack of violence. In a time where war divides humanity, it's important to remember how violence is not always the answer. Thank you.